welcome to Teckno Tuesday, the weekly podcast about the first tech challenge and other stuff related to engineering and science. My name is Kendrick Bender. I am here along with
Jeffrey Bender,
Phil Robot Guy,
Derek Moss,
AJ Savopoulos.
All right, so we've got everybody here today. We're gonna start doing a lot more FTC stuff because our most recent podcasts, there weren't actually a lot of FTC subjects. Like last week was all about cars. Seeing as this is a podcast about FTC, let's start out with FTC.
Worm gears. Let's discuss worm gears.
Those are legal.
They are legal. They were actually legal last year as well, but they were supplied by FTC. But we didn't use them last year. But
now they're extra legal.
Yes, we've tried using them this year. I'm still not. I think the jury's still out on them. They're great. What's good about a worm gear? Who knows?
They gear down like crazy.
They gear down like crazy.
Power, and they can't be run
back driven.
Yeah, back driven.
Yeah, so they're really good for something you want to stay where it is once the power goes out. That's a good feature for FTC. So we decided we'd try using it on an ARM this year.
It's awful slow, isn't it?
No, it's not. Well, there's multiple gear ratios. The standard worm gear, 4-to-1, not a huge reduction. There's also a 10 and there's also a 20. But when we tried using the 10 directly, we soon learned that the biggest problem was going to be the fact that the shaft that goes through the worm gear, not the worm, but the worm gear, is not held in very strongly. It's got 2 set screws, but I mean, you just can't hold a lot of torque. And so we found out that, and the set screws loosen up. So we tried Loctite in them, blue only.
If you tried red, I'm sure it would stay.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, yeah, so even after moderate amount of use, they're starting to loosen up, which if you don't care about accurate positioning is fine, but for an ARM, it's kind of critical.
Well, you could also manufacture your own axles and even hubs and stuff if you really wanted to. But
it's pretty tricky. I did a bunch of research to try and find, compatible gears or compatible pieces that we could put together to get a more strong joint to the axle. Like for example, a key or a octagonal or a square. But it's very hard to find compatible parts that are within our size range. Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but keys are kind of annoying to deal with. And, I mean, what we did for our manure spreader back at home, we welded the key onto the sprocket. So it's
there for good.
Yeah, it's there for good. You can't take it apart. But, I mean, you could probably do something like that so it doesn't come loose around.
Welding is legal.
Well, no, but the problem is that the hole is very small. So it's only a 3/16 axle. It's going to be very hard to machine either the axle or the gear assembly to take a key, even a tiny one.
You can make your own worm gear.
That's also not easy. Well, see, what our last resort on this is going to be, we are actually going to epoxy or red glue the axle into the gear. The downside with that is you can't take it out. It becomes a permanent assembly as part of the C channel now. There's no way to get it out. So the whole thing becomes a replaceable part now. C channel, gear, axle, bearings, bushings, everything. That's one part now. So if you want to spare, you have to spare that whole thing. So you don't want it to be too elaborately attached to your robot at that point. Half a dozen bolts is probably all you want to allow. Otherwise, you'll never be able to replace it. So worm gear is interesting. Probably not a great solution if you're actually trying to transfer a bunch of power. If you just need a slow drive, it'd be fine.
So you think 20-to-1 isn't good? It'll just the set screws can't hold that much torque.
Yeah, if you want, I mean, it'd be good if you didn't want to do a lot of power. If you just needed to move an indicator or a slide or something that just did something lightweight. But not an ARM. Not going to happen. And in fact, the 4-to-1, we did the 4-to-1 and then followed that by 2-to-1 gear to try and offload some of the torque off the actual worm gear. But still not totally successful.
Yep.
And speaking of arms and hanging, Got Robot and another team that I can't remember the name of both got onto the hanging bar last Saturday. And
so it was a double hang.
Yep, it was a double hang. And the thing was, instead of side by side, they were right on each other.
Oh, I saw that.
Hanging from the same
Okay, they can't be side by side.
They can't be side by side, yeah.
It's really weird. I'm not sure I understand this strategy. I've seen some interesting games where in one match, the red team lined up on either side of the ramp. Like one was on one side on the red and the other one was on the one side on the blue, and they both came in and hung next to each other. How is that not a penalty?
I don't think that one hang counts.
But rather than that, I mean, if you were hanging in the other guy's hanging zone, aren't you preventing them from hanging? By definition, that's impeding their ability to do the end game, which should be a full penalty, it seems to me.
Well, I thought it was in the rules that you couldn't cross the center line when you're hanging. Period.
Well, it doesn't count as a hang.
Yeah.
But I mean, anything with your robot. It seems to me if your robot is on the other side of the ramp and anywhere near stopping someone from hanging, it's a penalty on you.
I agree.
The big 50-point penalty.
Yeah, but they haven't made it that way thus far. They already made
What do you mean they haven't made it that
Well,
way?
they already addressed it by saying it won't count as a hang. They never even say anything about a penalty, which I thought was interesting.
But it's a penalty to impede someone's ability to hang.
If it's blocking somebody, the other team from hanging. So if you're hanging on their half of the hanging bar, then you may be preventing them from even having a chance of doing that. Now, of course, it's always, ref has the final say in everything. So it may have been like they said, well, the other alliance didn't even attempt to hang.
But they did. The other guy was trying to get up there.
Okay.
So it was like, it was a clear strategy because they both lined up well in advance to block the other team's ability to get to the ramp.
It was probably just a missed call and mistake on the ref.
Could have been.
Yeah.
Could have been.
I don't know what the final call was, but it didn't seem like because it was like a finals match and they all seemed to be celebrating and stuff. I was a little surprised.
Yeah, that's one problem with celebrating too early. Every once in a while, there's a big penalty or a disqualification that kind of ruins your day. But yeah, it still was a pretty cool hang. First double hang I've ever seen so far this year.
Yeah.
So they were like on top of each other?
They were both supporting each other.
Yeah, you can come up. You can both grab on and both
So there
push
was
yourself up.
so there was like
about the
one
same
in
spot.
front of the other, or was it?
Yeah, one in front of
One
the other.
hanging from
they
the
both, both of the robots were. The bar was like in between both the robots,
Okay.
and they both were grabbing on about the same place.
Okay.
And then
They both
both
lifted.
robots were supporting each other. Yeah.
The one I saw is where the robot came underneath the other robot and picked itself up by using the frame of the other robot's chassis. So it just basically lifted up by picking
That
up
sounds
from the
kind
other
of
robot.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how they got that balance to work.
They got it up, but yeah.
But an interesting strategy is if there was a question on the FAQs that was interesting, and the team was saying, okay, if we pull ourselves up on the bar, and then in order to let another robot come in to hang, can we reach out and push? Can we reach out and press against the side of the center support and push ourselves away from the bar?
They said yes.
Yeah, it's legal because you're allowed to touch that piece.
You're just not allowed to be supported by it. Like, you can't be latched onto it. Like,
Well, you can't latch onto
Okay.
anything.
that's a good point.
So you're allowed to be touching the vertical bar there. So it's kind of interesting. So that's a clever strategy. You push out a side piece and then push it forward and then swing away from the bar.
But then you run the risk of accidentally going into the other person's zone and losing your...
Yeah.
Not only that,
Well, it's on your zone. It's on your side. They're pushing you
Yeah,
back.
but I'm saying if you push yourself too far back, you run the risk of accidentally pushing yourself into the...
wouldn't that make you off balance?
no,
by
pushing yourself
backwards, not to the side.
not to the side, but actually putting your arm out and pushing it forward and swinging away from the
swinging.
bar.
Wouldn't that make you off balance though when you're pushing the robots just go sideways?
Yes.
Possibly. It depends how well you've attached. If you've got two attachment points on the bar, it probably wouldn't be a problem. If you've got a grappling hook, it might be a problem.
Or if both the robots support each other, which is really
grappling
cool.
hook.
Yeah.
So on the subject of robot designs and differences in designs and stuff, I'm interested to hear everyone's opinion on what you think the design process for a robot should be, because I know there's some teams that instantly go into building a robot, messing around with pieces and stuff like that, and then there's teams that plan everything out and then build the whole robot sort of at once type of a deal.
Well, back in the day, whenever I was on GeForce in like 08 and 09, we would pretty much draw everything out, make a prototype, quote, quote, out of cardboard, and then after we clear everything else like that up, then we finally start using real parts and making actual prototypes. Whenever I switched over to Teckno Clovers, when the team was created, we did the exact opposite. We just went straight for the parts, started making prototypes right away, and I don't necessarily think either of those are the exact right approach. I think there needs to be kind of an in-between. Like, here's my plan, and here's kind of the dimensions, and then we'll start making the prototype. And also not making the chassis first is probably about the best thing we've done lately.
We've flip-flopped the
Every
most
year.
recent years now, because we went from no planning whatsoever to maybe a little too much excessive planning, where we were planning out to the point where we almost didn't have a finished robot before competition, and we didn't have much time for testing it. And
Or drive practice, which is very important.
yeah, drive practice is really important. But
I think if you build your chassis last, it's easy to build your chassis around the components of your robot. I mean, because this year, I mean, we basically, it just took maybe 3 seconds to figure out what we want the frame to be. Then it was all about what tires we want for our drivetrain.
Yeah, I'm finding that's the hardest part right now, between how much traction you want, how much clearance you want, so the blocks don't mess you up.
I saw a pretty cool design. I'm sure it wasn't so much a design as oh heck, how are we going to fix this problem? I'll call that the team number 5257. So it's a neat little robot, but it looks like it's using 6 of the white traction wheels, but the outside 4 have got blue duct tape around them. Or blue gaffer's tape.
Wait, so they don't have any traction on those?
Well, the middle 2, correct. So what they've got is a spinny robot that turns really well, because the middle 2 pair of wheels have traction, whereas the outer ones are more support. Some drive, I'm sure, comes from them.
So it's kind of like an Omni without the full
Without the
rolling.
That's right.
Capability.
Exactly.
So it does roll a little bit, so to speak.
It slides, yeah.
Yeah.
it's kind of weird.
Well, yeah.
I thought you were going to say the outside 4 all pivot. They're all
That would
servos and pivot.
I like
That would be
Landroids
really cool.
whenever they did that, how they had the Omni drive, but they could turn it so it turned into a standard drive. It was really cool, I thought, for autonomous.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Back to building. I'm with Derek, how you need a balance of, I think you need to be able to have a written, drawn-up plan, a good design, pass it by the team to make sure they all think it's a good idea, and have them be the devil's advocate, so to speak. Point out all the faults so that you can be like, oh, I didn't think of that. Or,
But that comes after some prototyping, right?
yeah.
Yep, and then instead of just furthering your design theory or just making more sketches and whatnot, actually go out and build it instead of just keep.
Well, I don't think at any point have you guys been forced to do excessive drawings. I mean, you've definitely been required to try and do a drawing from a design, but I don't think you've ever been forced to do drawing after drawing after drawing on a given
More
design.
so than last year. We've done it this year more than last year, because last year there was no drawings. We just kind of were like, this is what we're thinking. Let's go for it.
Yeah, and then the engineering notebook suffers a little bit because we don't have any drawings, but
Yeah.
at least we had a robot.
The compromise is which takes longer.
Yeah.
You know, at some point, jumping off into actually building it with the real materials too soon takes longer, because you make all the mistakes and you have to take it apart, put it back together, and take it apart, put it back together again. But if you try and get it too complete, you've never got enough information to do the final version. So you need to do it enough so that you have good dimensions, that you have a good plan, you know how the materials are going to go together. But then to really show that it can work, you need to build a prototype.
Yep.
The goal would be to try and minimize the number of iterations you need on your prototype.
Well, and then there's the trade-off in competitions. You build a really fast robot really quick, you can get lots of drive practice, and you still may be able to score better than most of the robots at your first competitions or your qualifiers or stuff like that. But if you design your robot out more, it may be better, later on, like at Super Regional or Worlds, because then you have maybe a better design, and your drive practice is then caught up to the other teams that just built the robot right away and maybe don't have the best design, but had really good drive practice.
Given a choice, I think it should be that you can always make up drive practice at the last second. It's much harder to be redoing your design at the last second.
Yep, and
doing your design and then getting drive practice with that new design.
Well, no, we hit that before we went to our first competition 2 years ago, where we had, I think, 4 hours of drive practice, period. And
I think it was.
It was the last 2 hours of practice, so we had drive practice.
Oh, yeah.
But then we went, and we ended up doing pretty well as far as having only...
Second year, our first competition in Annapolis, our first time driving the robot was on the field for our first match. Technically speaking,
But the real question is that because you over-designed it or didn't do enough design?
we over-designed.
We over-designed
I think that was. I think that was whenever we. Yeah, we.
That was
designed it?
by far our most complex robot.
No, that's not what I meant. What I meant
We
was
didn't really-
you did too much design work, or you did not enough design work.
I think we did too much design work, and then we didn't leave enough time to build it, because...
I think we tried doing too much with the first competition. We tried to do basically everything with the very first competition, and we didn't actually have we didn't have any of our pieces really figured out until, a week before the competition. So, by the time we had all of the individual pieces figured out, it was like, oh, now we need to figure out how to get these all to work together.
Okay, but what I'm trying to get at, I understand what you're saying, but were you in that position because you didn't spend enough time up front designing before you started building, or because you just did lots of building straight away and didn't have a design together at the end?
I think it was because we were building at first and didn't really, think it through with on paper or stuff like that. Because we built the drivetrain. I think the drivetrain was the first thing that was finished. Yeah, it was finished in 2 weeks, and then we tried to build off the drivetrain, and they had to end up switching the drivetrain because
except for the first year I was on this team that we built the drivetrain, built everything around it. That year went the best I've ever seen this team. Like, we had everything done.
What game was that?
That was the crates.
Crates? It was the crates. Fold over, yeah. So we ended up doing really well
in competition.
In competitions because we actually had a nice balance of not too much planning.
I think the main reason that we didn't have the robot finished on time was because we switched over from 2 to 3 practices a week to 1 practice a week, and the competition came up a lot sooner than what it normally does because it started having qualifiers, and prior to that we never went to a qualifier.
That's true. That did move it up a lot.
The robot was nice to drive in competition, but we did have a lot of robot failures, like the tracks to lift up the crate into the ratchet. That would come off every once in a while, and we had to fix that before Worlds and stuff like that.
That was another thing. A lot of our designs on that robot were really complex for the first competition, and we didn't really foresee some of the problems that we had, and so we had to fix.
Luckily, you had a fairly simple drivetrain, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, luckily.
It was nice to drive.
That was the standard with Super Wheels?
It was our standard drive, which is just Omni wheels on one end of the robot, and then some sort of number amount of regular wheels
on the back end. It depends on how we're feeling for traction or / just wanting to put lots of wheels on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've run out of time.
Well, we only talked about FTC this week.
Only talked about FTC. So go ahead and leave feedback down in the comments. We'd really appreciate it. Love to see feedback. That's the best way that we can improve the show. Other than that, on behalf of all of us here at Teckno Tuesday headquarters, thank you all for watching, and have a nice day.
Hasta la vista.
Like, subscribe, comment.
See you guys.